Tales of Sheagorath. Various tales from the Elder Scrolls franchise, starring Sheagorath, Daedric Prince of Madness. 16 Accounts of Madness. Accounts of meetings between Sheagorath and the other Daedric princes. Volume 6. Hircine's Tale. Ever proud and boastful, Oblivion's mad prince stood one 5th day of mid-year among the frigid peaks of Skyrim, and beckoned forth Hircine for parley. The huntsman god materialized, for this was his day, and the boldness of Sheagorath intrigued him. Wry without equal, Sheagorath holds in his realm giggling loons, flamboyant auteurs, and craven mutilators. The mad prince will ply profitless bargains and promote senseless bloodshed for nothing more than the joy of another's confusion, tragedy, or rage. So it was that Sheagorath had set a stage on which to play himself, as rival to Hircine. Without haste, the coy prince proffered his contest. Each prince was to groom a beast to meet at this place again 3 years to the hour, and do fatal battle. Expressionless behind his fearsome countenance, Hircine agreed, and with naught but a dusting of snow in the drift, the princes were gone back to their realms. Confident but knowing Sheagorath a trickster, Hircine secretly bred an abomination in his hidden realm. An ancient Daedroth he summoned, and imbued it with the foul curse of lycanthropy. Of pitch heart and jagged fang, the unspeakable horror had no peer, even among the great hunters of Hircine's sphere. In the 3rd year on the given day, Hircine returned, where Sheagorath leaned cross-legged on a stone, whistling with idle patience. The prince of the hunt stuck his spear in the ground, bringing forth his unnatural, snarling behemoth. Doffing his cap, sly as ever, Sheagorath stood and stepped aside to reveal a tiny, colourful bird perched atop the stone. Demurely it chirped in the bristling gusts, scarcely audible. In a twisted, springing heap, the Daedroth was upon the stone, leaving only rubble where the boulder had been. Thinking itself victorious, the monster's bloodied maw curled into a mock grin, when a subdued song drifted in the crisp air. The tiny bird lightly hopped along the snout of the furious Daedroth. Sheagorath looked on, quietly mirthful, as the diminutive creature picked at a bit of detritus caught in scales betwixt the fiery eyes of the larger beast. With the howling fury, the were-thing blinded itself, trying to pluck away the nuisance, and so it continued for hours, Hircine looking on in shame while his finest beast gradually destroyed itself in pursuit of the seemingly oblivious bird, all the while chirping a mournful tune to the lonesome range. Livid but beaten, Hircine burned the ragged corpse and withdrew to his realm, swearing in forgotten tongues. His curses still hang in those peaks, and no wayfarer tarries for fear of his wrathful aspect in those obscured heights. Turning on his heel, Sheagorath beckoned the minuscule songbird to perch atop his shoulder, and casually strolled down the mountain, making for the warm breezes and vibrant sunsets of the Abetian coast, whistling in tune with the tiniest champion in Tamriel. Volume 9. Darius Shano found himself running as fast as he could. He had no idea where he was running from or towards, but he didn't care. The desire saturated his mind. There was nothing in the world except flight. He looked around for landmarks, anything to place him or to use as a target, but to no avail. The featureless grasslands through which he was sprinting extended as far as the eye could see. Just have to keep running, he thought to himself. I have to run as fast as I can. On and on he ran, with no end in sight or in mind. Standing over Darius Shanno while he lay quietly in his bed were his mistress, Vaernmina, the Dreamweaver, and the mad god, Sheagorath. Vaernmina looked down with pride at this disciple of hers, and was boastful of her little jewel. Such potential in this one! Through dreams or inspiration I have nurtured literary talent into fruition, and now he stands in acclaim as an emerging bard and poet. He will gain much favour before I tire of him. Sheagorath too gazed at the young Breton artist, and saw that he was indeed famous among the other mortals. Mused Sheagorath. But how many are there who hate this mortal whom you have built? It is the hatred of the mortals which confirms greatness, not their love. Surely you can accomplish this as well. Vaernmina's eyes narrowed. Yes, the mortals are indeed very foolish and petty, and it is true that many of their most bold have been despised. But do not worry me, Mad One, for I have the power to achieve many forms of greatness with this one, hatred among them. Perhaps, Dreamweaver. It would be amusing to show who has this power. Inspire foolish, arrogant hatred of this mortal for 10 years, and then I will do the same, and we will see whose talents are most efficient, free of aid or interference from any of the Daedra. At this, she relaxed into confident pleasure. The mad god is indeed powerful, but this task is suited to my skills, she thought to herself. The mortals are repulsed by madness, but rarely think it worthy to hate. I shall take great pleasure in revealing this to you, as I bring the more subtle horrors out of this mortal's subconscious. And so, in the 19th year of his life, the dreams Darius Shanno had been experiencing began to change. Fear had always been part of the night for him, but now there was something else. A darkness began to creep into his slumber, a darkness that sucked away all feeling and colour, leaving only emptiness behind. When this happened, he opened his mouth to scream, but found that the darkness had taken his voice as well. All he had was the terror and the void, and each night they filled him with a new understanding of death. Yet when he woke, there was no fear, for he had faith that his lady had a purpose. Indeed, one night Vaernmina herself emerged from the void. She leaned in close to whisper into his ear, "Watch carefully, my beloved." And with that, she pulled the void away, and for hours each night she would reveal to Darius the most horrible perversions of nature. Men being skinned and eaten alive by other men, unimaginable beasts of many limbs and mouths, entire populations being burned, their screams filled his every evening. In time, these visions gnawed at his soul, and his work began to take on the character of his nightmares. The images revealed to him at night were reproduced on the page, and the terrible cruelty and hollow vice that his work contained both revolted and fascinated the public. They revelled in their disgust with every detail. There were those who openly enjoyed his shocking material, and his popularity among some only fed the hatred of those who found him abhorrent. This continued for several years, while the infamous of Darius Shanno grew steadily. Then, in his 29th year, without warning, the dreams and nightmares ceased. Darius felt a weight lifted, as he no longer endured the nightly tortures, but he was confused. "What have I done to displease my mistress?" he wondered aloud. "Why has she abandoned me?" Vaernmina never answered his prayers. No one ever answered, and the restless dreams faded away to leave Darius in long, deep sleeps. Interest in the work of Darius Shanno began to wane. His prose became stale, and his ideas failed to provoke the shock and outrage they once had. As the memory of his notoriety and of his terrible dreams faded, the questions that raced in his mind eventually produced resentment against his lady Vaernmina. his former mistress. Resentment grew into hatred. From hatred came ridicule, and over time ridicule became disbelief. Slowly, it became obvious. Vaernmina had never spoken to him at all. His dreams were simply the product of a sick mind that had righted itself. He had been deceived by his own subconscious, and the anger and shame overwhelmed him. The man who once conversed with a god drifted steadily into heresy. In time, all of the bitterness, doubt, and sacrilege focused in Darius Shano, a creative philosophy that was threaded throughout all of his subsequent work. He challenged the gods themselves, as well as the infantile public and corrupt states for worshipping them. He mocked them, all with perverse caricatures, sparing no one and giving no one quarter. He challenged the Aedra in public to strike him down if they existed, and ridiculed them when no such comeuppance was delivered. To all of this, the public reacted with outrage far greater than they had shown his previous work. His early career had offended only sensibilities, but now he was striking directly at the heart of the people. His body of work grew in size and intensity. Temples, nobles, and commoners were all targets for his scorn, and finally, at the age of 39, Darius wrote a piece entitled The Noblest Fool, ridiculing the emperor god Tiber Septim himself for integrating into the pathetic Nine Divines cult. The local king of Dania, who had been humiliated by this upstart in the past, saw his chance. For his sacrilege against the empire, Darius Shano was executed, with a ceremonial blade in front of a cheering crowd of hundreds. His last bitter words were gurgled through a mouthful of his own blood. 20 years after their wager was first placed, Vaernmina and Sheagorath met with Darius Shano's headless corpse. The Dreamweaver had been eager for this meeting. She had been waiting for years to confront the Daedric Prince over his lack of action. "I have been deceived by you, Sheagorath. I performed my half of the bargain, but during your 10 years you never contacted the mortal once. He owes none of his greatness to you or your talents or your influence." "Nonsense," croaked the mad god. "I was with him all along. When your time ended and mine began, your whispers in his ear were replaced with silence. I severed his link to that from which he found the most comfort and meaning, and withheld the very attention this creature so desperately craved. Without you, his mistress, this man's character could ripen under resentment and hatred. Now his bitterness is total, and overcome by a madness fueled by his rage, he feeds me in my realm as an eternal servant." And with that, Sheagorath turned and spoke to the empty space by his side. Indeed, Darius Shano was a glorious mortal, despised by his own people, his kings, and even by the gods he mocked. For my success, I shall accept 60 followers of Vaernmina into my service, and the dreamers will awaken as madmen. And thus did Sheagorath teach Vaernmina that without madness there are no dreams and no creation. And this was a lesson that Vaernmina will never forget. In the days before the Orsinium's founding, the spurned orc folk were subjected to ostracism and persecutions even more numerous and harsh than their progeny are accustomed to in our age. So it was that many champions of the Orsimer travelled, enforcing what borders they could for the proliferation of their own people. Many of these champions are spoken of yet today, among them the Cursed Legion, Groma the Hairless, and the noble Emeg Grokera. This latter crusader would have certainly risen to legendary status throughout Tamriel had he not been subject to the attention of certain Daedric princes. Emeg Grokera was the bastard son of a young maiden who was killed in childbirth. He was raised by the shaman of his tribe, the Girilika Namong, in the peaks of what we now call Normar Heights. Late in his 15th year, Emeg forged by his hand an ornate suit of scale armor, a rite of ascension among his tribe. On a blustery day, he pounded the final rivet, and draping a heavy cloak over the milky mantle, Emeg set out from his village for the last time. Word of his exploits always returned home, whether defending merchant caravans from brigands or liberating enslaved beastfolk. News of the noble orc crusader began to grace even the lips of Bretons, often with a tinge of fear. Less than 2 years later, ascending to maturity, Grokera was making camp when a thin voice called out from the thickening night. He was surprised to hear the language of his people spoken by a tongue that obviously did not belong to an orc. "Lord Kera," said the voice, "tales of your deeds have crossed the lips of many and have reached my ears." Peering into the murk, Emeg made out the silhouette of a cloaked figure, made wavy and ephemeral by the hazy campfire. From the voice alone he had thought the interloper an old hag, but he now decided that he was in the presence of a man of slight and lanky build, though he could have discerned no further detail. "Perhaps," the wary orc began, "but I seek no glory. Who are you?" Ignoring the question, the stranger continued, "Despite that, Orsimer, glory finds you, and I bear a gift worthy of it." The visitor's cloak parted slightly, revealing nothing but faintly glinting buttons in the pale moonlight, and a bundle was withdrawn and tossed to the side of the fire between the two. Emeg cautiously removed the rags in which the object was swathed, and was dazzled to discover the item to be a wide, curved blade with ornately decorated handle. The weapon had heft, and Emeg realized on brandishing it that the elaborate pommel disguised the more practical purpose of balancing the considerable weight of the blade itself. It was nothing much to look at in its present condition, thought the orc, but once the tarnish was cleaned away and a few missing jewels restored, it would indeed be a blade worthy of a champion 10 times his own worth. "Her name is Neb Cresen," spoke the thin stranger, seeing the appreciation lighting Grokera's face. "I got her for a horse and a secret in warmer climes, but in my old age I'd be lucky to even lift such a weapon. It's only proper that I pass her on to one such as yourself. To possess her is to change your life forever." Overcoming his initial infatuation with the Ark of Hone Steel, Emeg turned his attention back to the visitor. "Your words are fine, old man," Emeg said, not masking his suspicion, "but I'm no fool. You traded for this blade once, and you'll trade for it again tonight. What is it that you want?" The stranger's shoulders slumped, and Emeg was glad to have unveiled the true purpose of his twilight visit. He sat with him a while, eventually offering a stack of furs, warm food, and a handful of coins in exchange for the exotic weapon. By the morning, the stranger was gone. In the week following Emeg's encounter with the stranger, Neb Cresen had not left its scabbard. He had encountered no enemy in the woods, and his meals consisted of fowl and small game, caught with bow and arrow. The peace suited him fine, but on the 7th morning, while fog still crept between the low-hanging boughs, Emeg's ears pricked up at the telltale crunch of a nearby footfall in the dense snow and forest debris. Emeg's nostrils flared, but he was upwind. Being unable to see or smell his guest, and knowing that the breeze carried his scent in that direction, Emeg's guard was up, and he cautiously drew Neb Cresen from its sheath. Emeg himself was not entirely sure of all that happened next. The first moment of conscious memory in Emeg Grokera's mind was drawing Neb Cresen, was the image of the curved blade sweeping through the air in front of him, spattering blood over the virginal powder coating the forest floor. The second memory was a feeling of frenzied bloodlust creeping over him, but it was then that he saw for the first time his victim, an orc woman perhaps a few years younger than himself, her body a canvas of grisly wounds, enough to kill a strong man 10 times over. Emeg's disgust overwhelmed the madness that had taken him, and with all his will enlisted, he released Hircine from his grip and let the blade sail. With a discordant ringing, it spun through the air and was buried in a snowdrift. Emeg fled the scene in shame and horror, drawing the hood of his cloak up to himself from the judging eyes of the rising sun. The scene where Emeg Grokera had murdered one of his own kind was a macabre one. Below the neck, the body was flayed and mutilated almost beyond recognition, but the untouched face was frozen in a permanent expression of abject terror. It was here that Lord Sheagorath, the mad god, performed certain rites that summoned Malacath, and the 2 Daedric lords held court in the presence of the disfigured corpse. "Why show me this mad one?" began Malacath, once he recovered from his initial, wordless outrage. "Do you take such pleasure in watching me grieve the murder of my own children?" His guttural voice trembled, and the patron of the Orsimer looked upon his counterpart with accusing eyes. "By birth she was yours, brother outcast," began Sheagorath, solemn in aspect and demeanor, "but she was a daughter of mine by her own habits. My mourning here is no less than your own, my outrage no less great." "I am not so sure," grumbled Malacath, "but rest assured that vengeance for this crime is mine to reap. I expect no contest from you. Stand aside." As the fearsome prince began to push past him, Lord Sheagorath spoke again. "I have no intention of standing between you and vengeance. In fact, I mean to help you. I have servants in this wilderness and can tell you just where to our mutual foe. I ask only that you use a weapon of my choosing. Wound the criminal with my blade, and banish him to my plane, where I can exact my own punishment. The rights of honor-killing here belong to you." And with that, Malacath agreed, took the wide blade from Sheagorath, and was gone. Malacath materialized in the path of the murderer, the cloaked figure obscured through a blizzard haze. Bellowing a curse so foul as to wilt the surrounding trees, the blade was drawn, and Malacath crossed the distance more quickly than a wild fox. Frothing with rage, he swung the blade in a smooth arc which lopped the head off his foe cleanly off, then plunged the blade up to its hilt in his chest, choking off the spurts of blood into a steady growing stain of red bubbling from beneath the scaled armor and heavy cloak. Parting from the unexpected immediacy and fury of his own kill, Malacath rested on a knee as the body before him collapsed heavily backwards, and the head landed roughly upon a broad flat stone. The next sound broke the silence like a bolt. I'm sorry," sputtered the voice of Emeg Grokera. Malacath's eyes went as wide as he looked upon the severed head, seeping blood from its wound, but somehow kept alive. Its eyes wavered about wildly, trying to focus on the aspect of Malacath before it. The once proud eyes of the champion were choked with tears of grief, pain, and confused recognition. To his horror, Malacath recognized only now that the man he had killed was not only one of the Orsimer children, but very literally a son he had blessed an orc maiden with years hence. For achingly long moments, the two looked upon each other, despondent and shocked. Then, silent as oiled steel, Sheagorath strode into the clearing. He hefted Emeg Grokera's disembodied head, and bundled it into a small grey sack. Sheagorath reclaimed Neb Crescent from the corpse and turned to walk away. Malacath began to stand, but kneeled again, knowing he had irreversibly damned his own offspring to the realm of Sheagorath forever, and mourned his failure as the sound of his son's hoarse pleas faded into the frozen horizon. Myths of Sheagorath by Memophanous. Magical myths about the mad god himself. Sheagorath invents music. In the earliest days, in a time when the world was still a roar, Sheagorath decided to walk amongst the mortals. He donned his guise of gentleman with a cane and moved from place to place without being recognized. After 11 days and 11 nights, Sheagorath decided that life among the mortals was even more boring than his otherworldly existence. What can I do to make their lives more interesting? He asked himself. At that same moment, a young woman nearby commented wistfully to herself, "Oh, the sounds of the birds are so beautiful." Sheagorath silently agreed with her. Mortals could not make the beautiful and inspired calls of birds. Their voices were wretched and mundane. He could not change the nature of mortals, so that was the purview of other Daedric princes. However, he could give them tools to make beautiful sounds. Sheagorath took hold of the petulant woman and ripped her asunder. From her tendons he made lutes, from her skull and arm bones he made a drum, and from her bones he made flutes. And he presented all of these gifts to the mortals, and thus music was born. Sheagorath and King Lyandir. King Lyandir was known to be an exceedingly rational man. He lived in a palace that was small, simple structure, unadorned with art and ugly to look upon. "I do not need more than this," he would say. "Why spend my gold on such luxuries when I can spend it on my armies or on great public works?" His kingdom prospered under his sensible rule. However, the people did not always share their king's sense of practicality. They would build houses that were beautiful to look upon, although not necessarily very practical. They devoted time and energy to works of art. They would celebrate events with lavish festivals. In general, they were quite happy. King Lyandir was disappointed that more of them did not follow his example and lead frugal, sensible lives. He brooded on this for many years, and finally he decided that his subjects simply didn't understand how much more they could accomplish if they didn't waste time on these frivolous activities. Perhaps, he reasoned, they just needed more examples. And so the king decreed that all new buildings must be simple, unadorned, and no larger than was necessary for their function. The people were not happy about this, but they liked their king, and respected the new law. In a few short years, there were more plain buildings than ornate ones, and the citizens used the money saved to make and buy even more lavish art and hold even more excessive celebrations. Once again, King Lyandir decided to provide them a strict example of how beneficial it would be to use their time and resources for more practical purposes. He banned all works of art in the city. The people were quite put out by this, but they knew that their king was doing what he thought was best for them. However, human nature was not so easily denied. In a few more years, the city was filled with plain, simple buildings and devoid of any sort of art, but the people now had even more money and time to devote to their parties and festivals. With a heavy heart, King Lyandir decided that his people were to be treated like children, and like all children, they needed rules and discipline laid down by great figures of authority to make them understand what was truly important in life. He decreed that there should be no revelry in the city. Singing, dancing, and music were all banned. Even food and drink were limited to water and simple foodstuffs. The people had had enough. Revolt was out of the question since King Lyandir had a very well-trained and equipped army. They visited the shrines and temples in droves, praying to all the gods, and even some of the Daedric princes, that King Lyandir would revoke these new oppressive laws. Lord Sheagorath heard their pleas, and decided to visit King Lyandir. He appeared to the king in his dreams as a field of flowers, with each with arms instead of petals, and the face of the mad god in the center. I am the Lord of the creative, and the Lord of the deranged. Since you have no use for my gifts of creativity, Lyandir, I have decided to bless you with an abundance of my other gift. From that day forward, every child born in the city was born into madness. But since infants do not reveal illnesses of the mind, it was several years before this was realized. The king's own son was among the victims, suffering from seizures and delusions, yet King Lyandir refused to change his ways. When his son Glint was 12 years old, he stabbed his father while King Lyandir was sleeping. With his dying breath, King Lyandir asked, "Why?" His son replied, "It is the most practical thing I could do." The new young king ordered all the palace servants slaughtered. He ordered a grand festival to celebrate his new reign and the repeal of Lyandir's laws. He served the crowds a stew made from the carcasses of the palace servants. He ordered the east-facing walls of every building painted red, and the west-facing walls painted in stripes. He decreed that all citizens were to wear ornate masks on the back of their heads. He then burned down the palace and began the construction of a new one. In the new palace, the young king ordered his personal chambers not to have any doors, for fear that small woodland creatures would attack him. He ordered that it have no windows, for fear that the sun and the moon were jealous of him and plotting his death. And thus ended the line of King Lyandir. The people of the city returned to their grand works of art and raucous celebrations. They talked and acted as if they still had a living king, and even kept up the palace, using it to house and care for their mad children. Sheagorath was mightily pleased with this outcome, and from that day forward the city was blessed with more than the normal number of gifted artists and deranged citizens. The Contest of Wills. A mighty wizard named Ravate once walked the winds of time to find Lord Sheagorath. His intent was to win a favor from this most capricious of the Daedric princes. Upon finding Lord Sheagorath, Ravate spoke humbly to him. "Lord Sheagorath, I beg a favor of you. I would gladly drive 1,000 men mad in your name, if you would but grant me the greater magical powers." Now, fortunately for Ravate, Sheagorath was in a playful mood. He proposed a game. "I will grant you your wish, if you are still sane in 3 days. During that time, I will do my utmost to drive you mad. It shall be great fun." Ravate was not so certain that he liked this new deal. He had been really looking forward to driving 1,000 men mad. "Lord Sheagorath, I regret having disturbed you with my shallow, selfish request. I withdraw my unfortunate plea, and will humbly leave this place." Sheagorath just laughed. "Oh, too late, mighty Ravate. The game is afoot, and you must play." Ravate fled, only to find that all exits from the Daedric realm were now sealed. He wandered aimlessly, constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every noise. Each moment brought new terror as he waited for Sheagorath to begin. After 3 days, Ravate was convinced that every plant and animal was a tool of Sheagorath. He hadn't eaten or drunk for fear that Sheagorath had poisoned food or drink. He hadn't slept for fear of Sheagorath invading his dreams, which was foolish, as dreams are the domain of Vaernmina. May she grant us restful sleep. It was then that Sheagorath appeared to him. Ravate cried out. "You have set the whole world to watching me. Every creature and plant are you doing your bidding to drive me mad?" Sheagorath replied, "Actually, I've done nothing. You have driven yourself mad with your fears. Your delusions prove that you are truly deranged, and therefore I win. While you wanted to make 1,000 men mad, I only wanted to break one man's mind. Yours." From that day forward, Ravate served Sheagorath's every whim. Whenever daring travelers try to approach Sheagorath in his realm, Ravate warns them, "Sheagorath is already inside each of us. You have already lost."